All right, everybody, there's been some conversation and some thoughts going around recently with folks that I coach and even my own headspace. How do you manage an outcome you're not happy with when it comes to competition, or for that matter, in training, workouts, what have you? Of course, some of this is very, very specific to competition, and I will cover some of this in in a later video on managing expectations during training or workouts. But in this particular case, I want to focus primarily on competition. And my athletes that I coach compete in any number of levels. There are a handful that are that are racing in the real world right now, not virtual. Very, 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 very few. However, there are a lot more that are racing virtually. And some of the things that are coming up, I would say, are twofold, okay? You've got outcomes and you have performance. And what's going on is that we've got issues with expectations on outcomes and expectations on performance. Performance quite often will drive outcomes. So I like to start there first with all of my athletes. It's in the name of the company, Positive Performance Coaching. And if you are working with a coach or you've purchased a training plan that's promising you that in X number of weeks, months, or a year that you're going to be on the podium, I'd ask for my money back. Unless you are an athlete that's been at this for a lifetime with very little downtime and maybe you've switched sports, then those expectations should not be had. Instead, you really need to be thinking and working with a coach that understands what goes into getting an athlete on the podium. With that being said, we take a look at outcomes. Your expectation, your goal was somewhere top 5, maybe podium, top 10, top 20, top 30, and you miss that outcome and you start going through the whole woulda, coulda, shouldas. Or maybe sometimes even worse yet, you actually had a good outcome, but the performance wasn't what was anticipated. Maybe it was much lower than anticipated. Quite honestly, as a coach, I look at that and go, wow, that person raced smart. They used their resources in a very limited fashion. They moved through the field well, and they won their race. That's fantastic. But I've also been that athlete, just like yourselves, that looked at your numbers and said, you know what, I'm not happy with these numbers even though I won, or I was on the podium, or I met my outcome-based goal. So what we got to do is this, and I tell everyone this: turn it off. So as soon as that race, that competition is over with, you want to turn off the whole woulda, coulda, shoulda inner dialogue. I'm going to send a link out in our show notes, and it'll come across here in just a second with regards to an article that I wrote recently and a follow-up video on critical thinking, and I'll make sure that that shows up. That is a much larger, broader topic on how to train yourself not to get stuck with the woulda, coulda, shouldas. And I strongly advise that if you keep finding yourself with that happening at the end of competition or training, that you follow up on that article. All right, so one of the things that when I look at performance metrics and outcomes of the performance, and when they don't go to play, there's a myriad of reasons. And I think a lot of it has to do in virtual, not so much about road conditions because you're indoors. It has a lot more to do with what's going on between your ears at the start of a race, what is going on physically. Have you had enough rest? Did you eat everything correctly? Did you do your pre-flight correctly? That's another video I want to do, is pre-flight, understanding what goes into getting everything organized and ready for that race. And it doesn't start the day of a race. Sometimes it can start weeks and even months before a big race. And with all of that being said, if none of those things are going to plan, your headspace is a wreck. I look at it as like a jumbled up tangle of knots, like your earbuds, when they get really knotted up, if you slept in them or something. That's what I think of with my headspace when things aren't going to plan. Sometimes I'm lucky and I can pull one out, but quite often when I'm rattled and I can't think through things, it's not going to go well. The other problem that many of us face are with equipment. So regardless of what sport you're in, there's equipment involved. Runners like to think that they don't have any equipment, and they do. It's what they wear, their shoes, their socks. any kind of device or gadget that they're tracking their performance metrics with, all of that could throw a wrench into the works. Did you start your watch soon enough? Did it just quit on you? Did you forget to charge it? Is it not connecting to GPS? What's going on? All of those things plague every athlete. So when all of that is painfully obvious and you look at the final data and it's like, well, on my run, my watch didn't connect. On my bike, I didn't get clipped in correctly, or my power meter stopped working, or my heart rate strap didn't have a good fresh battery in it, or speed and cadence sensor was glitching. That kind of stuff is going to really be a problem, and you have to go off of perceived exertion so that you can understand, if you've been training and racing for a while, that what this feels like that's going on in this body right now is the equivalent of me riding in zone 3 or zone 4 or zone 5 with power or heart rate. And if you're not familiar with the whole perceived exertion concepts, it's not something that I've created. It's a Borg scale, and you can learn about that in our webinar on training zones. And I'll leave a link to that as well. So one of the things that I would also bring about in this discussion is, if you're new to racing, stop trying to put expectations on yourself on outcomes. Learn how to race first. Learn what others do. Be a sponge. Keep your head on a swivel. All that information is coming in at you through here. So remember, there's lots of information that you're taking in that race, in that competition, that may not actually surface immediately. That's what education is about. Sometimes you have to have that experience first, then have a similar experience and go, aha, I've been here before, and then you're able to rectify that. So sometimes it requires race day knowledge and lots of it. So the more that you race, the more that you're going to learn. Now, this is a bit of a break from this topic, but one of the things that I will say is that if you are primarily just Zwifting, whether you're a runner or a cyclist, and Rimmer is soon a rower, is that you're going to have to understand that some of what you come up with and learn in Zwift is not going to translate to the great outdoors. That, especially in cycling, when you're elbow to elbow, wheel to wheel with folks, it's not the same thing as doing this outside. As a matter of fact, if you've got this really long time frame indoors on your bike, when you go back outside, I strongly advise that you don't just jump into your first criterium race and expect things to go well. Instead, once the pandemic is more or less over and you feel safe, then go start with smaller group rides, work your way up to larger group rides. Runners really aren't that much different. I think, 5K specialists, even in a 3,000 person field, 5,000, 6,000 person field, I think that we do run into some claustrophobia from time to time with athletes I coach. And when they get stuck in a really fast moving group and they're moving at a clip that they're not comfortable with, and they're like, where's my out? How do I get out of this group that I just got myself into without someone running into me or me running into somebody else? I think that if you're doing things like that, then you probably need to get in with a group as well once it's safe to. All right, everybody, this is kind of a mishmash of thoughts that's going on. I think this next video is going to be a little bit clearer when I start talking about more or less the same thing from workouts. And hopefully, if I'm not striking a chord with you, do me a favor, leave me questions in the comments area and I will answer them. All right, everybody, have a great rest of your training week and we'll talk again very soon.